This episode of Welcome to Dystopia is sponsored by Grandstone Shoes. Grandstone Shoes is a third generation of family of shoemakers that uses high quality leather to make high quality men's dress shoes and boots at a good price. Mo and I each have a pair. We've worn them for over a month, trying them out, testing them out in different situations, and we like them. If you don't believe us, go and look at the 5-star customer reviews on their website. They have a lot of them, and there's also very good reviews from independent fashion bloggers. If you like how the shoes look, enter promo code SILVER, SILVER, for 10% off your order. That's grandstoneshoes.com. Enter promo code SILVER. Hi, everyone. It's Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street and managing editor of The News Doctors and independent financial journalist Eric Dubin. Welcome back to another Welcome to Dystopia episode. This is episode number 28. This is the redo of the last episode number 28. Now, Eric, I want to talk about the gold and silver market. You know, we've had a pretty long correction going. Do you think we've started to put in a bottom yet for both the gold and silver mining shares and also for the paper gold and silver prices?
Yeah, we've already put in a bottom, but whether or not the bottom holds is always an open question. I mean, what caused this large downturn was the attack that came into the market at the turn of October. And Tuesday before last Tuesday, we basically started the bottoming out process. By Thursday, the shares and the price of precious metals were reflecting the bottoming, and it's even more visible in silver than in gold. And in particular, silver never breached the 200-day moving average, which is important for a lot of the speculators that are playing in the COMEX market, and those guys have been one of the major forces that has been behind the bull market run all year. So, you know, we got shellacked as we started October, and as we were concluding, you know, the September options expiration, on COMEX, and how basically that was being used to attack the markets and then enabling short covering by the bullion banks and all of that. I mean, the cycle that we have spoken about many a time on the show was repeating. And it looks like now that we're, approaching November 8th and people are more nervous about the outcome of this election, and rightfully so, I think that just a general malaise is going to start being priced into overall equity markets to the downside when it comes to, standard equities. And then as well, we'll probably see some increasing interest in just hedging the possible outcome of, say, for example, a Trump win, because I believe that if Trump were to win, that it would be interpreted by the markets as a negative. The average financial professional would look at things like Trump's probable barbecuing of trade agreements or not actually getting them signed, because at this stage the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the agreement between North America and Europe are very much open for debate as far as whether or not they're going to get through. We probably will see, Obama pushing them through in the lame duck session after the election and before the transition to a next president and a new Congress. At least that's the scuttlebutt and the rumors. But anyway, not to digress too extensively, but that's just a singular example of how, or rather what would in fact be probably moving through the process of being priced in through sentiment on the eve and ultimate election of Trump if he were to win. And something like that would probably upend markets. They'd probably put a big, strong bid under gold. And because of all of these dynamics I just described as being not exactly unknown to a huge number of people, I mean, that whole thesis I just outlined is something that a lot of market participants understand. I think that as we get closer to the election, just generic uncertainty, and markets hate uncertainty, I think generic uncertainty is going to probably give us a little bit more pressure to the downside for general equities and upward pressure and interest among those who want to hedge with precious metals.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of increases in volatility in currencies. Again, we've seen very big moves in currency markets in the last 18 to 24 months in the Brazilian real, the Japanese yen, and even with the British pound, we had a 6% move, Eric, in only 2 minutes in the British pound. It's just these moves are unprecedented. I don't think I've ever seen a move like this since I've been following markets before.
Yeah, there. We have gone since like 2012, 2014 or so, with the S&P 500 going in that long artificial range and then just leveling out. We've seen so many examples of markets being so manipulated that when, in fact, the manipulation gets long in the tooth, the volatility explodes. And we see that kind of volatility translating through pretty much all markets. I mean, we've seen pretty astounding examples in the bond market many a time, too. So the markets are all supported by artificial liquidity in various ways. And because of this and because of the duration that this insane game has been going on, the volatility gets worse as we proceed in the end game. And I think that 2017 is going to be the year that we see the missing ingredient of the overall faith in central bankers having the back of the market just vanish, because it's been an illusion, and a lot of market participants have been just playing long.
Okay, so before we stop talking about gold and silver, I had a couple other points I wanted to talk about. So, with the bull market going back in gold and silver, a lot of it was not increasing physical demand from India and China. As the paper price in gold and silver was increasing, they weren't buying as much. They were cutting back their purchases because they're more prudent in general about waiting for dips. So we had a lot of Western trend traders and hedge fund managers, and those guys were buying gold and silver mining stocks, and they were chasing the paper price up. But now that we've had a correction, Eric, we've had a lot of signs from increasing demand for physical gold again, both from the People's Bank of China, from the Shanghai Gold Exchange. I believe in India, the physical demand for gold jewelry is the highest it's been now in 4 years for India. So that's a good sign that when
premiums also moved up too in terms of the import duties over what the taxes are. And that is a pretty significant development because India hasn't had premiums like that for many, many months. So India is ramping up their gold demand.
Yeah,
and we've also seen, physical demand as well be pretty strong when it comes to bullion products, even in the West, retail markets. This week we saw the Mint sell over 1.5 million coins, and they typically are not able to produce more than 1 million in any given week, so they're starting to burn through their inventory. And we've even seen premiums on 90% go up over $1 in the last 2 weeks. So this is clean signals from the market that tell us that the physical market is absolutely tightening. It's not open for debate, and that is in fact why we have seen silver, for example, bottom out Tuesday before last.
Yeah, and strong physical demand, where the demand for physical metal is increasing, that's what eventually puts in bottoms in the paper price. So, the bullion banks and everyone else involved in the manipulation, they can knock the price down a while, but then that increases more buyers into the market who want to come in and buy the metal at a discount. And, we don't run out of gold and silver. What happens, though, is certain amounts of metal available at certain prices, those inventories get cleaned out, and the market needs to reset and go to different price levels in order for more supply to start coming back online. Well, I wanna now that we episode 28, the original episode 28 vanished. That was actually before the RMB went into the SDR. Now the RMB is in the SDR. There's been a number of newsletter writers that have exaggerated, the effect of it. I think it's going to take at least a couple years for the SDR to have any type of meaningful impact. It's going to take at least a few years for the RMB to have any type of impact into the SDR because, the SDR bonds are not large enough. The market is just not large enough yet. What one listener of ours who's a longtime listener brought up is that, there's over $200 trillion of assets and liquidity worldwide, and there's just not a lot of places to move that yet, besides, out of U.S. dollar and treasury markets and things like that. So it's going to take time, Eric, in order to transition to the next global financial system.
My high school classmates. If you weren't going to college, you got a job pouring coffee or something. So lots of great jobs don't require college.
Hello?
I'm sorry. I had a banner ad attack me. I had to turn off the chick. Hopefully, I guess we can leave that in there. People would want to be amused. in the travails of almost live radio. Yeah, the SDR basket was basically the means by which to, help China get more international recognition for their currency and expand the markets and expand the liquidity for it. And it's going to be a multi-year process. I mean, some 62% of reserves worldwide stored in central bank coffers or sovereign wealth funds or what have you are U.S. treasuries, and that represents the lion's share of what are, in fact, the reserve assets of the financial, or rather the reserve assets that are held by central banks and sovereign wealth funds, and that, in fact, defines the currency basket for the IMF as well. So it's going to take years for the renminbi to represent more than 1.5, 2% or whatever it is right now. I forget the exact number, but it is a relatively small number in terms of the percentage of bonds that make up reserves held at central banks and sovereign wealth funds. And that's different than, the use of the renminbi as a trading currency for the purchase of goods and services and transactions for worldwide trade and whatnot. I mean, the renminbi is the fourth largest transaction currency right now, too, which is rather substantial. But it's a long way away from being a major reserve asset in the central banking and sovereign wealth fund system in the background in which that represents for the mechanics of how the currencies trade. So it's going to be a multi-year process, and the whole idea about October having an inflection point that changes the entire markets, or first of the year turning being some kind of inflection point where absolutely everything changes, is just nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's probably just done to sell newsletters, but having worked at a paid newsletter company and seeing what the copywriters and the marketing department does, a lot of the hyperbole and stuff like that, and I've, when I was a junior investment analyst at the firm I worked at, they stuck me on the customer service phone calls because no one else wanted to do it. And most of the angry phone calls were from people who were upset at the marketing tactics from the newsletter company. So
no surprise. And it's not, I don't mean to suggest that this isn't a gigantic shift in the way in which, our world is going to move and the way currencies are represented in terms of reserve assets. Of course it's a big move, but it's going to take years for the evolution to play out. It's not like something's going to completely change overnight. And it's going to be a very positive development overall, too, for gold as well, even if gold doesn't even become an asset within the SDR, which is part of discussions that are going on now. Simply because the dollar will, over time, decline relative to other currencies, and that, in turn, for the dollar basis price of gold, will be a positive for gold.
Yeah, so I have two other current events I want to talk about on the show before we get into the debates and the election and in the scumbag section. There was a Harvard poll that came out a few weeks ago that 56% think the economy has either stayed the same or gotten worse since 2008. So this doesn't jive with the narrative that a lot of the mainstream media is saying, that Hillary Clinton is saying. There are people waking up. Unfortunately, Eric, I think, a lot of people are blaming the wrong people, the wrong things for why the economy isn't as good as they thought. They're blaming capitalism when we have, fascism, when we have crony capitalism. So the real people who are working hard and creating jobs and paying taxes with their businesses and trying to do the right thing every day, they're getting the blame for something that, big government and fascism and, these cartels like the Federal Reserve and the Food and Drug Administration and so many other industries have been cartelized are actually doing instead.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, I just saw this story yesterday on Twitter. It looks like Vladimir Putin is going to put Russia into OPEC and reform OPEC, and that he's going to lead the cartel. Him and Saudi Arabia are going to be the two ones running it now, so it'll be called something else. I don't think it'll be called OPEC anymore. I'll call it something else. So there's going to be a new oil cartel in town. Putin's the new sheriff in town for the oil market.
Yeah, well, OPEC and negotiations among the participants within OPEC never go smoothly, and remains to be seen what happens with that.
Well, maybe
I'm skeptical in part because of the kind of geopolitical dynamics that exist between Saudi Arabia and Iran in particular, but how Putin will fit into this as well too, or how Russia, I should say, shouldn't be personalizing it, because akin to how our financial media deals with anything with respect to Russia. But in any event, it is an interesting development. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and speaking of Russia, the Hillary Clinton and other members of the U.S. government, a lot of Democrats, a lot of government agencies are just blaming Russia, for the Wikileaks hacks. They're trying to shoot the messenger. They're going after Wikileaks. They're trying to blame everything on Russia. And, that's trying to deflect, I guess, what's actually in the messages, in the emails. So, that gets us to the debates. We recorded episode 28 of Welcome to Dystopia, the original episode 28, after the second debate. The second debate, I thought Trump actually did a lot better than the first. The first, Hillary got him, on tilt. He got him very emotional to talk about stuff and off message a lot. The second one, he was more on point, I would say. He was focusing on messages. He actually brought up the Federal Reserve. He talked about, for a minute or two, I don't like everything Trump talks about, obviously. I'm not going to vote for him. I like Hillary Clinton even less. But, for a minute or two, Eric, during the second debates, Donald Trump actually sounded like Ron Paul, bringing up the Federal Reserve, calling Janet Yellen a political hack, and then talking about the debt problems a couple times.
He even went as far as to explain in very cursory terms why the Federal Reserve is a problem, and that was pretty amazing to see that on national TV and that kind of a high profile. So, and I don't believe there really was much focus in terms of the after debate assessment with media discussion of that particular point. It just kind of faded away. But that, in my opinion, was one of the more interesting things about the second debate.
Yep. And the alternative media covered that portion where Trump brought it up, but you're right, the mainstream media, whether Fox News or the Clinton News Network, CNN, or any of the main regular networks, which are almost all heavily slanted Democrat and are basically doing everything they can to try to make sure Hillary wins, they didn't talk anything about the Federal Reserve or anything like that, because Hillary Clinton's line has been the Federal Reserve is not political, you should leave them out of the debates, because probably her friendship with Janet Yellen, since they've been friends for a while.
Yeah.
And Janet Yellen's also a lifelong Democrat. And a lot of the people who are at the Federal Reserve are also lifelong Democrats. They're rich limousine liberals.
Janet Yellen knows that she's going to hear Trump say you're fired if he gets elected.
Well, I wonder who Trump could actually replace her with. I wonder if he'll actually allow, an audit of the Federal Reserve. We'll see. Unfortunately, I think the Democrats are trying to do everything they can to stack the deck to make sure Trump doesn't win. I still think the election is going to be really close, even though, the mainstream media is claiming on the polls that Hillary's got it in the bag really easy by 9 points. But I really don't believe those polls. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think.
Yeah, and even the 9-point average is something that is excluding other polls. I mean, if you look at Real Clear Politics polling data, where they have, I'm just eyeballing it here, it looks like 13 polls quoted within since October 10th. I mean, that's a representative sample that actually means something, because there's a very wide breadth of poll coverage. But even with that average, they're saying Clinton is 6 points ahead, and that's including 6.4 percentage vote ascribed to Gary Johnson. And, the Libertarian Party's never polled more than that much more, over 1% of the popular vote. So obviously it's really a stretch to think that Johnson's going to poll 6.4%. It's going to be interesting to see where those votes go.
Well, there's a lot of Bernie Sanders people, Eric, that won't vote for Hillary. So some of them may vote for Donald Trump, some of them may vote for Jill Stein, and some of them are even going to vote for Gary Johnson.
Well, that's true, but don't forget that these exact same ratios were existing 6 months ago when Bernie was still in the race, and it wasn't like, people answering polling telephone calls had the forced choice of thinking Clinton would only be the choice that they faced. So I'm not so sure that what we're looking at here is going to translate cleanly to any particular direction. But generally speaking, I think that the majority of those Johnson votes are going to end up pulling levers for Trump. But we'll see.
Yeah. So
if that happens, that spread all by itself, combined with margin of error from a statistical point of view, with respect to polling science, those two things all by themselves make the polling suspect. And that's not even touching what we already know are documented ways in which the polling organizations have been manipulating up a storm with what they're doing this presidential season. I've watched polls for a long time. I've even done some polling myself, and the stuff that's going on now is pretty obnoxious. It's really over the top.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the mainstream media ever being, even Fox News, a lot of them, at least half of them are anti-Trump on Fox News. So
yeah.
there's a really large amount of anti-Trump people. It's just an enormous amount on the mainstream media. It's really unbelievable. I don't remember ever seeing anything like this. If our listeners want to see something pretty funny, though, go and watch Trump's 18-minute speech from the Al Smith dinner last night. He did it on Thursday night. And it was basically a room full of rich Democrats. And in the past, when Trump was a rich Democrat, everyone loved him. He even mentioned this in the speech. He was like, before I became a Republican and ran, for president, he was like, I was best friends with everyone in here, and everyone
right.
knew my name and complimented me. He was like, now you all and then he started repeating some of the nasty comments that some of them have said about him. So he was like, jokingly showing the hypocrisy of a lot of the people in the room there. So I think, the mainstream media, most of the journalists, there's actually an article showing this, that the political affiliation of a lot of the journalists, and I have journalists in air quotes because they're really just political hacks, right? They're biased, subjective political hacks. And, we know now with the Wikileaks documents, Eric, that some of these journalists were actually paid off to either change articles or write articles, or they went because of their political affiliation. They asked, the Clinton campaign if they needed to edit things to make her look good. So it's just, that's not real journalism.
And then we have the problem of self-censorship, which is basically 10 times bigger, but ends up coloring the way our news is delivered, where reporters are basically following their own vested interest of not rocking the boat within their own system. And that really is the kibosh on our whole media paradigm in the United States and beyond, actually, but it's really bad in the United States.
Well, what I heard, I was watching Hannity after the debates, and he said that some of these guys were worried about having their journalism, not their journalism licenses, the corporation. So, like the big corporate, the 5 or 6 media companies, they were so worried. Actually, it wasn't Hannity. I did watch Hannity after the debates, and I normally don't watch that. But it was Alex Jones was interviewing James O'Keefe, the guy who did the videos, of the violence, right? And, the mainstream media wouldn't have him on. But O'Keefe was there at the third debate, and he said he was walking the red carpet there, and he said big-name journalists on a bunch of different networks came up to him and said he did a great job covering all the stuff, but they said that he wasn't allowed to be on by the show because the lawyers at the corporation said they can't have O'Keefe on because then they'll be getting calls from the Justice Department about their communications license and all this other stuff.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So
that whole long debate about the fairness doctrine was tied up with threats of going after FCC licenses, and that's just an example of how corrupt our system has become. That the politicians are willing to even threaten that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, I agree. And Alex Jones brought up, I have been watching a few videos lately from Alex Jones because, you just can't find a lot of the information on, I watch AMTV2 with Christopher Green. He's more libertarian than Alex Jones. I would say Christopher Green's more of a Ron Paul libertarian.
Yeah. I mean, Alex Jones's media operation has improved over the years, and they've gotten more professional in the sense that the way in which they produce stuff is vastly improved, and they do better when it comes to fact-checking and all that. But, the InfoWars is not the very best of sources, in part because they just kind of shoot from the hip sometimes and run with stuff. But,
well, Google's going to have an official fact-check now, too, on Google. But the Google fact-check, Eric, is probably only going to be mainstream, Democrat-leaning progressive stuff that shows facts. So they'll be quoting, anything Paul Krugman says as a fact, anything, Janet Yellen says as a fact without challenging her, anything Obama says as a fact.
This is the company that's been caught red-handed manipulating the algorithm output for Google search engines, where, great examples, you type in Hillary, and instead of Hillary Health showing up when everyone practically around the world was hitting search engines and searching the heck out of those terms, it wasn't showing up as the first couple of listings on Google's page. And that was outright human decisions behind what, in fact, their algorithms were allowed to do. It was a case of outright censorship and intervention. Google's is out of control.
Yeah,
Facebook, all of them.
Yeah, and they're also demonetizing the videos that are anti-Hillary Clinton on YouTube. So they have that in their algorithm. They can demonetize. They can either easily take out new videos and demonetize those, or they can go back to old videos where you made money off of and strip those too. So
and make it harder for things to be served to new viewers and on and on. They manipulate all kinds of stuff to change the way in which information is being perceived by the masses.
Yeah, so I was going to nominate Facebook for a scumbag for, intentionally blocking links about the DNC link hacks and some of the other WikiLeaks stuff. But the psyche of voters, man, I have some funny stories I think our listeners want to hear. I touched on a couple of them briefly in the short little video this week. But, I was speaking on Facebook. I saw some really anti-Trump comments from someone who I knew when I was still in college. And this is a very smart, bright woman. She went to a very good school, almost Ivy League school, went to Vanderbilt, lived on the East Coast, moved back to the West Coast, and started working, in Silicon Valley at Salesforce and other technology firms. She's not stupid. So she's very book smart, has a degree, educated. But, they're not willing to, they don't have an open mind. You could give them mountains of evidence, right? That, look at all these WikiLeaks information, look at all this other information showing how bad the Clinton Foundation is, showing how manipulative and lying and scumbags almost all the Democratic National Committee is, right? And all these other tricks that they're doing, you could show them, videos from James O'Keefe about the Democrats, inciting violence at Trump rallies and paying people. And, they would just say, it's all made up, it's all a lie. Or, I don't care, Hillary's better. Hillary never did any crimes or anything. So, we're just running into lots of these people nowadays. It's really unbelievable. After the debates on Twitter, Eric, I was discussing with this girl on there, and she claimed she didn't support Trump or Hillary, but she was adamant that the Trump Foundation, because the Washington Post is spending all this time and money hiring reporters to look into the Trump Foundation, is this enormous scam, and she didn't know anything about the Clinton Foundation. She claimed to know who Charles Ortel is, but the Trump Foundation, compared to the Clinton Foundation, is a tiny little pimple, when we know through Charles Ortel's work, going through all the publicly disclosed financials of the Clinton Foundation, that the Clinton Foundation is $100 billion of fraud and tax evasion and other, scams.
And it's outright pay for play. I mean, that is already documented. Never mind the open question as to how big the scandals are and magnitude of monies that are in propriety examples. The bottom line is that this organization was interfacing with the State Department while Clinton was Secretary of State. I mean, this isn't even open for debate. And the fact that we have all of this obfuscation of just very basic facts just goes to show how much propaganda is going on. I mean, earlier you were making a point about the Democratic Party, and just for the sake of fairness, I mean, clearly the Republican Party and many of the people who are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans and are taking the Kool-Aid that the Republican Party dishes out when it comes to particular policy issues are a problem as well, too. I mean, this isn't just some kind of Democratic Party phenomenon, but what's so amazingly different this time around is that the entire establishment is against Trump, and a vast swath of the Republican Party is also foaming at the mouth. It's a full court press when it comes to trying to spin the way in which people interpret Trump the man, and the fact that they have been successful in having Trump largely be perceived for all of his personal foibles and whatnot, which are indeed fair criticisms. The guy's kind of a maniac. It's a changing of the subject. I mean, who cares about opinions with respect to him dissing women, for example, relative to the moral sins of Hillary and what she's done when it comes to defending her husband's crimes against women? I mean, that whole moral comparison is framed in the media almost non-existent, but even when it is discussed, it's completely poo-pooed as conspiracy theory, and that, everything's turned on its head. And I'm saying all this not because I'm in favor of Trump or making any partisan argument. These are just basic facts. But Americans are not interested in basic facts. And elections are usually, exercises where at least 80% of the general public is just voting because they have a personal preference about someone's personality and whether or not they like them. And they don't even dive into whether or not somebody's going to be a good person when it comes to the decisions that they make and the policies they represent. And more often than not, policies that our leaders represent, our so-called leaders, our elected officials, are the exact opposite of what they speak about and against the interests of average American people.
Well said, Eric. And we know that Hillary Clinton's personality is totally phony. We know from these WikiLeaks emails she pretends to like women, but her Clinton Foundation is taking donations from countries that abuse women, that hurt them. So, like Umma Abedin and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and these other countries that just treat women very poorly. So, Hillary Clinton has committed, dozens of felonies. And, people just don't want to hear it. Like this woman and her friends who were Silicon Valley Democrats, they were well educated, book smart at least, they didn't have any common sense. They were calling me stupid. Oh, you must believe everything Alex Jones says. And then one of them even said that CNN never lies. And that was literally, Eric, the same day that CNN was going on TV. They had anchors going on TV and saying that regular Americans aren't allowed to go on the WikiLeaks website. It's illegal for them to read the Podesta emails. That they only journalists, only responsible professional journalists are allowed to do this. And, these guys didn't even want to cover the story for a while. This was a forced grassroots groundswell that came up, whether it was James O'Keefe or other alternative media covering the WikiLeaks dumps and so many other stories. And the stories became so popular at grassroots through social media that the mainstream media has been forced to cover this, even though, they didn't want to cover it at all. And, the old excuses about, we're worried about our broadcasting license. And they're also supposedly, I heard Hannity mention that they're worried about retribution from the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton administration if she wins and takes office. So, because supposedly she's going to start going after the media if she wins.
It's going to be terrifying what would happen with the Clinton presidency and the backlash that will come to alternative media. It's going to be nasty. The efforts of trying to control the public perception on practically everything will be stepped up.
You want to move with me, Eric, down to Panama?
Let's go, man. I'm out of here.
It would surely improve my dating life because, a lot of the women here are, hardcore social justice warriors. They cut their heads down to like pixie dust. They love Hillary Clinton. The new thing now on the dating apps is that like they have pictures with Hillary or they have pictures like with Hillary posters and like them like in taking like weird pictures with them. So, they think if you bring up the debt problem in the United States, you're an evil, greedy, insensitive person. You don't have a heart. I've heard that one before too. Around here. You brought up we should have a dating contest for like $500 for one of our listeners to come out here and meet me. So I don't know if we're ready to do that, but if there's public response to that, maybe I'll think about it.
Well, the question is are you ready?
I'm not a shy little virgin.
I didn't mean it that way. All right, we're having too much fun here.
Okay,
but yeah,
so,
it would be great to, we'll do a Warren Buffett style lunch contest, and instead of competing to have lunch with Warren Buffett, you can meet Jason Burack.
Yeah, so
you'll be on CNBC in 5 years, dude.
I don't want to be on CNBC. If they had me on CNBC once, I think I would probably go off on a rant about like the Federal Reserve, and it would get
and they'd never have you back.
Yeah, and they would never have me back. So it would get like maybe 1 million views on YouTube, and I'd be getting like I could monetize maybe my YouTube channel a little bit more, get some more paid advertisers or a book deal or something. or get a hedge fund, but yeah, they'd never let me back on CNBC again. Or they would attach all these conditions. Or maybe it would be like on CNN, how like they had a guy mention WikiLeaks and then there was a satellite problem, right, earlier in the week.
Yeah, or they'll just have a big hook ready to grab you and yank you off stage.
There were some technical difficulties with his satellite feed, so we apologize for that, right after he mentions the word WikiLeaks.
Bill Murphy of Le Metropole Cafe in Gata was on CNBC's Ron and Sana program back in 1999, and the producers told him for years that they would never let him back. They outright told him. He's never been back. He's been in the program in Asia, but that's it.
Yeah, I heard BNN is the same way, the Business News Network in Canada, that you're not allowed to mention gold or silver manipulation on the air, or GATA, Gold Antitrust Action Committee, on the air, or they won't let you back on. That's it. You're done. They'll kick you off the show right then and there, and you won't ever be allowed back on. But I forgot to mention...
And that's new. They never used to be that way, and now they are.
Well, this is welcome to Dystopia, Eric. This is why we did this show, right? To make fun of things like this. So instead of crying, we can laugh a little bit. But the other things I forgot to mention about the gold market in my notes here. So we have now Russia is going to be selling physical gold on a contract to China. It's not a very large contract, but it's another source of physical gold for China. The other thing is China's now opened up direct gold shipments to Beijing. So this is important. So not only now is mainland China getting shipments of physical gold from Hong Kong and also into Shanghai, it's now also getting them into Beijing. So that's another way for the People's Bank of China and private Chinese citizens to get physical gold. And obviously they're not going to give the real accurate numbers of that because there's no incentive for China to tell the full truth about that.
Yeah, and then the problem is also compounded when it comes to organizations like the World Gold Council not really knowing how to compute their estimation of Chinese gold demand, and they basically fudge factor things when they build their models. And for the longest of time, we had the majority of the gold flowing into China coming through the Hong Kong import window. And when that began to change over the last couple of years, the whole presentation even of Chinese ongoing gold demand was easy to shift and manipulate, and we would constantly see articles in, for example, Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal or what have you, discuss Chinese gold demand in only a limited form and distorting the whole picture because of this change that happened with Hong Kong. Now that we have Beijing also stepping in as an importation window, it's going to further enable all of this obfuscation by the goofballs that are even including the World Gold Council, who is supposedly an advocacy organization to help support the growth of demand for precious metals. I mean, it's so loopy seeing what this industry has devolved to and how it isn't just an issue of China purposefully trying to conceal how much gold that they're stashing away, but it's also the interest within the West muddling the picture.
Yeah, so I think, long term, this dip in the gold price, it's going to prevent the dip in the paper gold price. It's going to prevent a lot of new gold and silver mines from being built immediately. There was some gold and silver miners that were raising some capital recently, but not quite enough to actually build out a mine. They were in the process of maybe raising some capital needed to build out the mine, but now that we've had a correction, if the correction stays for a little while longer, the odds of new mines getting built in the near future are very low. So that's going to delay new mines getting built for a while. So we'll have to have the price move back up in the near future to provide incentive then to start building new mines. And we just don't have the prices right now to build new mines. So there's going to be reserve depletion, and that's going to force the cycle to rego a new cycle, and the bull market's going to have to start powering higher again. Plus, I think, all these central banks are trapped. We just keep hearing crazier and crazier things in the white papers, whether it's Janet Yellen or Larry Summers lobbying to get the Federal Reserve permission to start buying individual U.S. stocks and corporate bonds, or white papers talking about really massive negative interest rate targeting or inflation targeting. So we're getting to really, really, let's see here, the right word, crazy policies from central bankers. It's getting to like the end game for the Ben Bernanke helicopter speech. I've heard some people think the U.S. will be at fully negative interest rates, where as a depositor, your money at the bank will be negative. You'll be charged a 1 or 2% depositor's fee on your checking account in the next year or two. So I don't know for sure. I can't give you an exact timeline on when that'll happen. But as long as the people are in power are Keynesian and they have this ideology that we need more and more inflation, and they're going to try to force people to spend money, at some point this is probably going to happen unless we have a global financial system reset in the next couple of years.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, it's one thing to have complete negative interest rates in any given smaller country, or have examples with the entire spread for corporate bonds even going negative or whatever. But when you're talking about the core of the international monetary system, which in essence still remains the dollar-based monetary system, and you imagine a scenario where the entire yield curve for the U.S. bond market, 10 years all the way down to T-bills going negative, how do you have a banking system that functions when that is the prevailing interest rate paradigm? You no longer have a banking system that can operate with a spread to empower profits. The banks literally go bust. I mean, they obviously make a lot of money when it comes to trading and speculating and all the financing and all that, but the core of the commercial banking system, at least the way it used to be, was based on making money on the spread. And when you have it was only 5 some odd years ago that it was considered impossible to have negative interest rates as we are now seeing worldwide. And frankly, I think that it is impossible to have negative interest rates at the core of the system. We haven't gotten there yet, but if we do end up seeing the policymakers try to implement in a panic the kind of white paper thesis of the utility of negative interest rates as a tool to solve any given problem, I think it's going to blow up on them. And I can't imagine how you can survive and have a banking system function for more than 2 years with a full negative paradigm in the core of the financial system. And that is a theoretical understanding that I don't think a lot of these guys or gals in the academia are thinking about. That they're just completely oblivious to it. And it was really only 5 years ago that something as crazy as negative interest rates weren't even conceivable in the minds of most academics. It's truly shocking.
Yeah, and the really funny thing, and this is an unintended consequence, is the politicians, passed Dodd-Frank, right? And that was supposed to regulate the banks. After 2008 crash, when the banks started getting all this TARP money and the bailout money, that was supposed to help repair the banks so they could start making money again, start giving out loans. But the banks didn't start giving out loans, although they've been giving out a lot of commercial real estate loans, and that's creating now a commercial real estate bubble that's going to burst at some point in the near future. But, Dodd-Frank is actually going to limit a lot of the banks' trading profits. It's going to make it very difficult for a lot of these banks to actually do trading and speculating. So it's going to hurt profitability even more. So you have negative interest rates plus Dodd-Frank compounding the bank's ability to make even more, to make any profits at all. So, we're setting up for another banking crisis. We obviously have Deutsche Bank and the European banks, which could start, infecting the rest of the global economy, the rest of the banks in the global economy. Although, in 2008, it started in the U.S. and it went elsewhere, but it looks like it's going to start in Europe this time. We'll have to see, though, how the bailout for Deutsche Bank is decided. Obviously, if politicians like Angela Merkel, they would love to not have to nationalize the bank. They would love it if, the European Central Bank via the Federal Reserve did the work for them. Because, look at U.S. politicians. They don't want to have to make the tough decisions about Social Security or fixing the economy that way with fiscal policies. In the past, normally they've mostly let the central bankers have to do most of the work to try to stimulate and boost the economy.
Yeah, and when it comes to the rot in the European banking system, we know that that's the aggregation of the largest problems, and in particular the possibility of derivative domino cascades and counterparty problems and all that. But it isn't necessarily that Europe will in fact be the trigger, but it is absolutely the case that that's where the majority of the fuel for disaster exists, where the rot exists in greatest number. And we may see a trigger come out of Japan. We might see something even come out of the United States, particularly the transition of power that we got going on here. I truly do believe that 2017 is going to be the year that we see a shift come where the missing ingredient that we have had all along for major market disturbance enters the picture, and that's the majority of participants within the financial market that manage money no longer believing that the central bankers are in control. And all the while, since 2008, the prevailing understanding by the majority of people who are managing money are that the central bankers are in control. And that confidence is going bye-bye. And it is in directly related to our discussion about negative interest rates, too. I mean, we have $14+ trillion of sovereign debt worldwide right now that is trading in negative territory. And that is an indication of a broken economic and monetary and financial system.
Yeah, Eric, I think we're in an economic minefield. So, the European banks may seem like the obvious one, Deutsche Bank and the European Bank may seem like the most obvious mine, but there's so many more mines that either we can see some of them, so we could see a low oil price, we could see Japan, but there's ones we don't see. So the commercial real estate bubble is starting to grow. There's a subprime auto loan bubble. There's a student loan debt bubble. So we don't know when these things are going to burst, and these things are so large on their own, they can infect a lot of other counterparties and cause major problems throughout the global economy.
And the bond market is the biggest bubble in world history, arguably. I mean, negative interest rates is but one example of that. We've never had negative interest rates the way we have now, ever. We have a 400-plus year bubble in the credit markets.
Yep.
There's nothing like this ever. It is a disaster that's going to unfold at some point.
But we've also never had every single currency on the planet all fiat. There was always a safe currency to go to, or one of them was backed by gold. So we're in a really disgusting science experiment. Well, actually, it's not science because Keynesian economics only thinks it's science. So it's a lab experiment that, these pseudoscientists who are PhD Keynesian economists think that they can, pull this lever and pull that lever and that they can get the economy going. And instead, they've just made things worse and worse and worse. And compounded the mistakes and their errors of the past. So no wonder then that Alan Greenspan is finally being honest now, and he's actually saying that, bad stagflation is coming. I mean, I think we've had, on Main Street, we've had stagflation for a while. People on Main Street, you look at your Obamacare premiums, you look at your cost of living rising, rent, food, utility bills. These things are all going up, and your tax bills are going to go up too. Besides just Obamacare, they're going to be layered on. And, the people in power are talking about there's not enough inflation. So it's just very frustrating. Before we wrap up the show, we got some scumbag nominees to talk about. The first one is George Soros. I think with the new WikiLeaks Podesta email dump today, George Soros was highlighted in it. I think his cell phone number and email address were actually released, if you want to call and harass. But, with these James O'Keefe videos coming out, George Soros was one of the main funding guys. George Soros is, this evil James Bond villain that's trying to divide us by race, class, gender, age. He's like the old... one of the old Marxist philosophies there about divide and conquer people, so we fight with each other over, this small issue or that small issue, while the global elites like George Soros just get all the monetary deals done, like trade deals, like TPP and other stuff for them done, so they can just keep plundering us while we fight with each other over these other issues.
He is the perennial scumbag. We definitely are going to be considering him for Scumbag of the Year award.
Yeah, he may just beat Hillary Clinton for it, although, Hillary does make a strong case to win back-to-back.
Hopefully she won't win the election, and then we won't have to remember her that much. We shall see.
Yeah, we'll find out soon enough. We're almost to the finish line, and I'll be glad when the election's over. Although, I don't. Who knows what the taxes are going to be on guns if she wins? Maybe I should buy my handgun now. I haven't bought one yet, and my birthday was a couple weeks ago, so I probably should have. Anyways, though, our next scumbag is Carrie Tolstead. For those of you who don't know who she is, she's a Wells Fargo executive who made $125 million in bonuses for for helping create the portion of Wells Fargo, and it was a large amount of Wells Fargo's business, of massive fraud. Over 5,000 employees, over 2 million fake accounts, preying on weak people, intentionally preying on uneducated people, on older people, elderly people, in order so the Wells Fargo employees can make excess commissions, high salaries, and the bank can make more profits. And, we all know who the largest shareholder of Wells Fargo is, and he was touting for years about, how Wells Fargo doesn't do any of these things that the other bad banks do.
Yeah.
Uncle Warren, Mr. Crony Capitalist himself, who pays he doesn't get a salary, well, he gets a tiny salary, but most of the money he makes every year, he pays himself in a dividend, which is a low tax, which is the lowest tax possible.
Yeah, his whole public persona is very well groomed. And he even does it himself consciously, going out and getting suits that are $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 suits tailored to make them look like they're not, excessively flashy and whatnot. His cherry Cokes swirling and visiting his Dairy Queen and all these.
Yep, and McDonald's. Yep,
hokey kind of efforts to make him seem like just an average guy. It's really the persona that he tries to put out there, and it's so fake. And then when you add on top of that all of the crazy crony capitalist stuff that he's done to make him who he is today, he truly is quite a scumbag.
Yeah, now he's good with discounted cash flow analysis and value investing. So earlier in his career, from listening to value investors who knew him, he wasn't as bad as this. His father, Howard Buffett, was actually the Ron Paul of his generation. His father, Howard Buffett, was actually, basically a libertarian, and it was in favor of the gold standard and hated massive government spending. He didn't like the welfare and warfare state. For listeners who aren't familiar with Warren Buffett's dad, Howard Buffett, I encourage you to go Google his name and go look up some of his speeches. He was a pretty amazing person. The apple did fall far from the tree, though.
Yeah.
And the last scumbag we have is CNN, which is the Clinton News Network. And besides people on Facebook telling me that CNN doesn't lie, CNN has a history in the past of whether it's Greg Hunter or Amber Lyon. Amber Lyon was an Emmy award-winning journalist. And then she went to, I think, Egypt and did a documentary on Arab Spring. And there was a lot of truth in there because she was boots on the ground. And there was a number of governments that didn't want her documentary to air. So she got fired for that, even though, she was a very well-respected journalist, multiple Emmy award-winning. And then Greg Hunter was a CNN journalist, too. In 2006, 2007, he was interviewing experts saying the housing bubble was overheating, there was going to be problems with it, and they fired him before the 2008 financial crisis because he wasn't positive enough and spinning how good the economy was. So CNN, in addition to those things in the past where people claim CNN doesn't lie, look recently now with the WikiLeaks. And just this week, Eric, CNN was talking about how it is illegal for regular Americans to go on the WikiLeaks website and read the Podesta emails. So it's illegal then apparently to find out about the truth about how these scumbags like Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and all these other scumbags that work for Hillary Clinton, in public they'll say things about certain types of voters, and in private it's the exact opposite. So it goes to show you, how hypocritical a lot of the elites are in power and how the mainstream media is in cahoots with them. So big government and mainstream media are now in cahoots with each other. When you were growing up, was this the case, or have things gotten a lot worse?
No, absolutely, they've gotten a lot worse. We were talking about the concentration of media earlier in our discussion, and the famous study by Ben Bagdakian. I am slaughtering his last name because I don't remember his last name, and I feel terrible about it. He used to be the editor of the Washington Post. He was somebody who was considered respectable within the media, and his reputation was golden. He did a number of books over the course of 30 years that documented how, we went from some over 80 corporations that controlled the stream of media that was consumed by the American public to a level of, 90 some odd percent, mainstream and beyond. Or more than 80 companies that represented the information that Americans consumed 30, 40 years ago, and now we're down to 5. And the interests that those 5 corporations represent are obviously far more concentrated as well, too, because they're gigantic corporations, and you have interlocking board directorships, and the advertising relationships cement the kind of self-censorship dynamics that we were talking about before as well, too. So it's just so pervasive in the way in which everything is now different because of this level of cartelization in media. And then when you have that kind of concentration, the interface between media and politics is just an easier plum to pick, and the media becomes more beholden to interests within both the political sector as well as how that interrelates with the business community overall, broadly defined. I mean, we have a system where the majority of the mainstream media is owned by 5 companies.
And not only that, there was also a recent study. I had it on my Twitter feed last week. I forget where it was from, but it said that they checked the political affiliations of all registered journalists in the United States, and less than 10% of them are Republican now. So they were showing over the decades how, 3 or 4 decades ago, it was closer to 50-50. Republican journalists and Democrat journalists, 50%, 50%. And now we're at a point where less than 10% of all journalists now are even Republican. Most of them identify as hardcore Democrat. So
yeah, that's true. But then again, even progressives believe and advocate for particular policies that aren't progressive. I mean, the whole world is just turned on its head. I mean, we have such artificial ways in which issues are being framed that you can have advocacy groups from the progressive camp advocating for something that's just outright fascism or what have you. I mean,
yeah, or they're like Hillary Clinton and a neocon, right? So they have some commonalities and with Republicans, because the foreign policy of Republicans and Democrats is basically neocon and warmongering, right? So
welcome to Dystopia. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and Mike Cernovich, who I think is doing very good investigative journalism right now online, I think he's a very brave guy. He's a lawyer and also a journalist, and he says that a lot of these journalists are actually, paid off by either, political parties or others to write pieces certain ways. So I think he was looking into the financials of some of these journalists, and some of them are deeply in the hole financially, and some of them are willing to be political hacks or do whatever, or write stories a certain way in exchange for extra money. So, this is the sad part of what happened when the economy is getting worse. Eric and I were talking about this, with the dating scene in major U.S. cities, and some of the women. When the economy gets worse, people are willing to sacrifice their morals to survive. So, this goes again back to the economy again. If the economy was doing a lot better, I don't think we would have even half the problems we do now in society.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, we're under an hour, so we're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you guys for listening to episode number 28 of Welcome to Dystopia. I don't know if we're going to do another episode before the election, but if we do another episode shortly, it'll either be right before the election comes, maybe that week, or right after the election. So stay tuned, guys.